Okay, guys, I think we'll start now. It's just gone 2 o'clock. So welcome to this webinar. This has been on my mind for a long time, and I'm sorry for the short notice to make it happen, but hopefully it produces a very interesting conversation for everyone. Firstly, I just want to introduce myself and just share a little bit more about the purpose behind this. So for those who don't know me, or even for those who do, my name is Tim Hopkin. 4 years ago, I founded the Land app, which is born out of my own personal frustration on our family farm just south of Guildford in Surrey. And basically, our farm is 90 acres, it's a blank canvas, and I was just perplexed that there was no tool out there to help me put together a whole estate plan and work with different stakeholders within the local landscape to design projects and schemes that really worked for the local landscape. And so, I just might mute everyone if that's okay. You can always unmute yourself, hopefully. So I was just frustrated by the fact that it was so difficult to turn around the farm. So I worked for a company called Pear Technology, who some of you might know. I worked there for 3 years, and after 3 years I left. And I was very fortunate to meet Ordnance Survey, who put me on a 6-month innovation program and helped us build the Land app, which over the last 4 years we've built. And our mission and objective has always been to support the transition of the way that land is managed, to make sure that businesses are healthy and secure, to make sure the natural environment is well protected, and that we're actually delivering real public benefits for the greater good. So that's the mission, that's why we built the Land app. And about 3 or 4 months ago, we decided to make the Land app entirely free to use while it's being used digitally to help support the transition towards best practice. So we'll come on to a demonstration of the Land app later. But the facilitation funds have always been, for me, a really interesting point. And I've known Brian McDonald for a long time and spent a lot of time with the guys at Frag Southwest and Jess at Game Wildlife Conservation Trust, because I really feel that these facilitated groups are an incredible opportunity for us to really create a natural capital marketplace. So just a tiny bit of additional context. Last week, we met with Ordnance Survey, Satellite Catapult, CLA, Royal Institute of Trust Affairs, to really look at what's the technical model behind creating this the support structure for natural capital. In the afternoon, I then spent some time with Treasury, who are incredibly keen to support what we're up to in terms of creation of this natural capital marketplace. So anyway, lots is happening, but what I wanted to do is I wanted to have a conversation with everyone here, you amazing people doing incredible things with land managers, to really open up the conversation and really kick it off as to how we could create the supply of ecosystem services back up into the wider economy, into the private sector, so that you guys who are managing groups have financial security for your members. So that was really the objective of why I wanted to do this today. We have today presenting, we've got Dan Gira from Frag Southwest, who's going to be talking a little bit about UK habitat classification and how they're using that as part of their ELMS trial and test. We've got Jess Brooks from the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust, who's going to be talking about the value and the future of these farming cluster groups. And we have Tom Curtis from the Landscape Enterprise Networks and 3 Kill talking about how facilitation funds can become the supply of these ecosystem services up to the aggregated demand, which is the piece that Tom's really working from. We're then going to have, I'm just going to demonstrate to you a little bit about the Land app and explain a little bit more how it can be used. And then we're going to have a discussion around next steps. So we'll try and open up the microphones if that works, and have a bit of a Q&A to talk about next steps. So really, just to reiterate, this is the start of a conversation. This is just to get everything going, rather than having a ready-made product. So this I see as a collaborative working efforts to produce something, and I very much see that I'll do everything that I can to help support this transitioning into sort of a wider marketplace. So that's everything from me in terms of the Land app and the purpose behind this. As I go through the demonstration of the Land app later, I'll go into more detail, so you can ask questions if you want, or I'm very happy to follow up with people afterwards. But with all that being said, thank you once again for everyone taking the time out of your day to join. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to Dan, if I can find Dan in the list. There you are. Dan, if you want to unmute yourself and do a little introduction. And you've got over 5 minutes now, because we wrapped off that first introduction quickly.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Tim. As he said, I am Dan, and I'm from the Farming and Wildlife Advisory Group. Myself and Jenny Phelps are part of a ever-growing trial for the environmental land management. And we're exploring the use of UK habitat mapping as part of our trial to create these management plans. We're working directly with over 35 farmers, 5 different communities and around 10 stakeholders in direct partnership with Ordnance Survey and of course LandApp, who we will discuss a bit more after this. But just for a quick introduction, I'm going to assume that no one's heard of UK Habitat just for now. I know some of you may have, but it is a relatively new streamlined mapping system that is aiming to map the whole of the United Kingdom. And what it's done very cleverly is merge all the different types of mapping that's well known out there. So your FEPs, your phase 1, your Europeans, and your National Vegetation Classification to try and make one mapping system that we can all work from as a framework and as a baseline. It's relatively new. We kind of got introduced to it about 18 months ago, but I know it's been a work in progress between the people who do logos are on the top right hand side for the last, gosh, about 15, 20 years. And I know one of them, Bill Butcher, is actually listening today. So if you have any questions directly about UK Habitat or maybe some suggestions, we can put those in the Q&As towards the end. But the main reason that FLAG and our trial was quite interested in it is the basic principle of its hierarchy. So you can go into as little or as much detail as you want, but it also allows people to build on other people's knowledge. So the basic framework for UK habitat classification is that the whole of the United Kingdom is divided into these 9 habitats. So you've got your grasslands, your woodlands, etc. And what they've done is using this, you can build up more and more information. So from a mapping perspective, when you are coding out your grasslands, you are just giving that grassland the letter G, and the same for, so for your wetlands, the letter F, and urbans, the letter U, and you build upon that letter to create mapping. So from our point of view for GIS data handling, it's minimal data to actually create a very detailed map. And what you do, as I'll show you in a minute, is you build on the letter G by adding a number and a letter and a number, and that will start coding it down to more and more detail. Just quickly on the theory, why we're using this is that we are fully aware that habitats provide different ecological benefits, different natural capital, and if we can assign different habitats to their ecosystem service they're providing, this might be able to create that market that Tim was just talking about for putting a value on natural capital. So we're looking at regulating services, we're looking at provisioning services, etc. And this diagram you can see is just one we got off the internet, but it kind of gets your brain thinking that if we can get all the habitats across the whole of the UK mapped, not just priority habitats, we can really understand what benefit is coming from the countryside and the wider communities as well. As I said, the UK habitat classification is hierarchical. So for example, if you're in a calcareous grassland, you're giving that initial level 2 code the G, but that level 3 code gives a bit more information, and it just adds 1 character. And this can build up to having about, I think, 7 characters is the highest, but for our trial, we are only going down to this level 3, apart from on cropland. Because we strongly believe that the farmers we are working with know very much well about their arable and their pastoral land. And this is the type of detail that we can also extract from a countryside stewardship. So what we have been working on at FLAG is the ability to use old maps. So for example, your current countryside stewardship or your HLS or ELS agreements directly translate into a UK habitat layer. So when we're looking at an arable field, for example, that's surrounded by different margins, whether it's got a flower rich or whether it's got a beetle bank going through the middle, they directly translate into a UK habitat code, which means we can use old maps to directly start building a picture about the UK habitat. So we are looking at, so for example, all the pollen could be assigned to just some of these. I mean, the game and bird mix strips, which we see quite regularly, they've got their own code, and we start building up a really good picture about what's happening across the UK. And another real powerful tool that UK habitat classification has brought is a secondary code, which is basically another data point that's attached to those polygons or that the area or habitat you're talking about. But this secondary code provides a lot more context to what's happening in that habitat. So it's all good and well knowing exactly what the habitat is, but if you're not understanding where that origin is or how it's managed, etc., you really can't place the natural capital ecosystem service it's providing. And what we are doing within our ELM trial is aiming for each habitat, so each polygon we draw, to try and assign between 3 and 6 secondary codes to each of those habitats, just to give a bit more context to what's happening. And I'll show you a map in a moment, but it really quickly allows you to identify habitats, but also understand what's happening there and really start to get a picture of how the ecosystem service can be improved and what's there already. So it's all about getting that baseline, working out what's there, and then how can we improve it. So it might be a change of management, it might be connectivity, etc., etc. But we're not just looking at the polygon-shaped habitats. What UK has done as well is look at these linear habitats, so the hedges, the dry stone walls, the ditches, and we're mapping all of these as well. So under the UK habitat classification, you will only map anything that's bigger than 5 meters squared, but we're also looking at these linear features that do. Just to give you an example of how we're using the secondary codes, we are defining between wet and dry ditches. Sorry, my internet might be a bit unstable. It's just giving me a warning. So do shout if things are going bad. Where was I? So with wet and dry ditches. So for example, we've got the code for our wet ditches. We can draw that linear feature, but we're also adding the secondary code 120, which just means it's wet permanently throughout the year. And the same again for 117, which means it's currently dry. With our ILM trial, we're just working out what's on the ground right now, and we can build on that. So as I said, we have a group of farmers that we are completing this habitat mapping for. And just a screenshot on your screen just shows you the power of this UK habitat classification. We can look, and the symbology shows we've got some modified grasslands. We've got some grassland that's been enriched, but also looking at those secondary codes, we get a lot more context and a lot more detail about what's actually happening in those fields. So for example, those veteran trees in the bottom right, which is the number 49. We've also got some planted young trees. It's sheep grazed, which is a management strategy, and also how it's fenced, so it is stock proof. But there's also some historic aspects that we can add using that context. So that one field, we know an awful lot just by a couple of lines of data, which means data handling, if we are going to do this at a large scale, UK habitat mapping really makes that quite easy to identify. And what we're seeing within FWAG is we want this to be a dynamic process. We envisage it being a yearly upgrade. So we get the baseline, what's happening now, and then next year they can resubmit. The habitats might not change, but it's those secondary codes that might change and tinker with, which will change the ecological service it's providing. The great thing is UK Hab is open source, very similar to LandApp. So we've been given access to all the indexes, the symbology was all done within the UK Hab parties as well. So it's made our trial kind of kick off quite well, quite quickly. And just to give you a bit of background, how we're using it within our trial itself, we have 20 farmers who we are going out and walking each field and UK Hab mapping down to either level 3, 4, or sometimes 5 if we can. And we're going to try and get a whole cover map. So you can see on your screen right now, this is just one of the estates we're working with. It's a group of 12 tenants. We visited 6 of the farms. And what we're trying to do is get a complete habitat map for that whole area, which covers over 3,000 hectares, understand where the connectivity is. We can filter it down by looking at certain habitats. For example, pollen. If we wanted to know pollen availability, we could just filter off the different habitats that are providing pollen, get a picture to where the weaknesses are, where there's hotspots, and therefore advise better to those landowners where they could put in more pollen or where it's not necessary because connectivity is already really good. And that's the crux of it at the moment. With the help of LandApp, and I'm sure Tim will get onto this, they are just in the process of getting UK Hab up and running, which means we'll be able to use farmers to contribute to this. Farmers is really key. They know their local area so much better than anyone else, and by getting them to input baseline data, even if it's the most basic, when we go out as advisors, it saves so much time being able to download that straight, knowing what's there and just building upon that. So we're hoping, and I think LandApp are pushing really hard on this, which is great. We'll be able to get some farmers to help us contribute that data, including their stewardship, including their UK Hab, and build a really good picture to try and improve natural capital across the Gloucestershire farms. And that's it for me at the moment, but please contribute questions and I'm happy to discuss things at the end where I can. Thank you very much.
Well done, Dan. Thank you, mate. That's really brilliant. And it's such incredible context. And from the conversations I've had with a lot of different stakeholders now, it really feels like UK habitat classification, it creates a standard language from which all different people engaged in any kind of design or project work they can all speak the same language, which I think, as we'll get on to with Tom shortly about landscape enterprise networks, it means nationally we can all be conveying the same information, and buyers and sellers of ecosystem services can all be working on the same page. So it's an incredibly powerful tool. And Bill, who's on this call, who founded or set up UK Habitat Classification, it really is quite extraordinary. So thank you, Bill. Next we have Jess Brooks from the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust. Jess, I'll let you unmute yourself. So Jess is just going to share a little bit about what the future of the facilitation funds or the farming clusters might look like from Jess's understanding. So Jess recently spoke at the CLA conference. So Jess, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you. So to start off with, I think for those that don't know the work of the Trust that well, I'll just sort of explain what our part is in all this. So back in 2012, we supported the nature improvement area, the first farmer-led one at the Marlborough Downs, Space for Nature. So that was the first sort of landscape scale farmer-led project there was. And off the back of that success, we set up 5 pilots, and Natural England commissioned a report into how those pilots went, and the findings were the major precursor to the Facilitation Fund being introduced in 2015, because it was pretty much a no-brainer for people to work together, and it seemed to go really well. So once the Facilitation Fund was introduced, it was hugely popular, the initiative grew. There's over 120 groups in the UK now, some self-funded, but the vast majority are funded by the Natural England Countryside Stewardship Facilitation Fund. Another tranche are being awarded funding as we speak after the 2019 round, which is great. So there's probably going to be several more than that by the new year. The concept is mainly concentrated in England, but it's taking off in Wales and Scotland too. GWCT have helped set up groups there over the last year. So me and other advisors at GWCT travel around the country advocating this collaborative bottom-up approach, and it's now very much in the mindsets of the main rural organisations and policymakers at DEFRA too. I'm sure I don't really have to explain the value of collaboration to a lot of you, but it probably falls into 3 categories. So number 1, we're all doing it predominantly because of the environmental benefits. So for wildlife, soil and water, we all know about John Lawton's principles of bigger, better and joined up, and what better than acting with your neighbours on a landscape scale and solving problems that you can't solve on your own. So environmental is one of the major benefits, and these can bring. The second is social, people, training, knowledge, that sort of thing. So it brings people together, has huge potential, and we've seen some amazing examples of groups engaging with communities so far, like the Marlborough Downs and the Thames Guardians and things. We've heard great stuff, and a lot of public interest, from other organisations and things too. It's all about training and knowledge. That's the core of what a lot of these groups do. It's about bringing it to the locality, making it relevant. And through this, land managers can really discover passion for conservation and sustainability. And they've got that really important support and advice network and contacts provided by that facilitator. Now, the bit that is quite exciting for the future is this concept of economically benefiting from collaboration. And we know that clusters are probably going to feature in elms. There's some sort of layer or bonus for working together, perhaps. But I think as a collective, it's naturally obvious that you'll have more bidding power together. You've got more might, more marketing as a collective. You've got things like equipment sharing and bulk ordering coming in there as well. But the most exciting thing for me and for Tim as well, because we've been chatting to some people about this, is that a cluster or a farmer group is an oven-ready project to invest in for concepts like biodiversity offsetting, net gain and natural capital. So some of you might have heard of N-Trade or the Environment Bank, but these are things that we'd like to explore in the new year. But basically there's a lot of private funds out there, developers, corporations, they're either required to or they voluntarily have environmental funds that can form substantial and long-term funding for donor projects such as Cluster. So I think groups across the UK have huge potential to tap into these big funds that will be available. So either in combination with or instead of, you know, ELMS potentially. The key to all those things working is, you know, we need to retain this bottom-up ownership of these farm-led projects, and GWCT from the start cannot stress that enough. It should be the farmers, you know, fully invested in the project and acting as the head, if you like, but the neck is all the supporting advice, the facilitator, the funding that keeps it upright. And that neck is essential, but it must be wary not to turn the head any way it wants, because then the whole model is at risk and the soul of the project is lost. So in terms of where GWCT can possibly help with all this, because Tim has mentioned, you know, forming some sort of platform for environmental market access in the future. We want to retain our role as support and advisory for this kind of movement. We really want this concept to succeed. So we're going to carry on doing the conferences, and we did the first Farm Cluster Conference in 2017. Following the feedback questionnaire that we sent out to facilitators after the conference, there was huge demand for a central online support resource. So we created a website, farmclusters.com, for groups to refer to and use as an information resource, and it's been invaluable to a lot of groups starting up over the last year since it was launched. But with our limited resources, we haven't been able to advertise it to partners in order to get more funding for it and content. So it's a work in progress, but the demand was there and we delivered it, and it's been a great help to a lot of people, but there's much more that can be done with it, we feel. The next conference, by the way, will be in autumn 2020. And I guess thinking about the future is possible that the website and the conferences can form part of or link to this idea of the marketing platform, so that land manager groups can access funds from all kinds of sources. And we're really keen to help support other organisations in this course, so that these groups of land managers can really reach their potential. As at the end of the day, money is a limiting factor, and we need to make it flow better to these groups, which have incredible potential to benefit not just the environment, but also rural communities and businesses. So that's it, we're here and we're happy to help in any way that you feel is appropriate. Thank you.
Jess, thank you very much. It's such an amazing resource that you guys have, and whatever I can do to sort of share that information out, or indeed I've been thinking about whether we have follow-up webinars that are on more sort of how-tos. So again, if there's more detail that you can share in a subsequent webinar, that would be brilliant, because you guys are really kind of leading the way with a lot of this as a large organisation. So yeah, we'll definitely be following up with more information afterwards. So thank you very much. So we now have Tom Curtis from the Landscape Enterprise Networks, or actually from 3 Keel, but then working, creating this project of Landscape Enterprise Network. So Tom, I will let you explain what that's all about.
Thanks, Tim. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Great. Thanks very much. Yeah, I'm sort of from 3 Keel, but also, yeah, from Lens as well, really, yeah, as you say, Tim. Mm-hmm. So Lens, Landscape Enterprise Networks, it's something really straightforward, really. It's about pulling together businesses who have a shared interest in the functioning or the quality and performance of the landscapes in which they perform, in which they operate, and pulling together those businesses and helping them to transact with groups of land-based businesses who can deliver against those demand side interests needs. So it's about building value chains. It's about building value chains where on the one side you've got more than one business who've got an interest in landscape functionality, things like the attractiveness of a landscape and its ability to attract and retain their staff, or flood risk management or nutrient management, And on the other hand, on the other side of the transaction, you've got groups of land managers essentially who can deliver value for that group of businesses. And essentially, what that represents is an opportunity on both sides of that transaction chain, of that value chain. From the businesses' perspectives, on the demand side, they're getting to influence and intervene and invest in assets in the landscape which matter to their business, matter to their ability to operate and make money, but assets which they don't own. So they get to influence those, and they get to perform better as a business and reduce risk to their business. And from the supply side, it's another product, another outcome that they can market from their land. Essentially, it's diversification, and it's a business proposition, a business opportunity. So essentially, that's the heart of Lens. It's building those sorts of transaction chains, those value chains, and we're doing Lens in. We've got active Lens projects in about 7 different landscapes in the UK: in Southwest Scotland, Cumbria, Greater Manchester, Yorkshire, Northamptonshire, Bristol, and on the Hampshire Avon. And probably it might help if I just sort of run through a bit of an example of one of them, so I can just sort of tease out a bit more of how it works in practice, and then the kind of Lens methodology. So the first Lens project we did was in Cumbria, where we started working with Nestlé, who have a milk processing plant in a place called Dalston, and essentially Nestlé were really interested in working out how they could manage the risks that come from the place in which they're operating. Essentially, manage the risks that come from the landscapes around them, the risks of their operation in Dalston. Dalston's a really big operation. It's multi-tens of millions of pounds worth of factory there, dependent on milk which comes from within a 50-kilometre radius of the factory, and essentially quite rapidly we could work out that that Nestlé plant needed various functions from the landscape. It needed that landscape to be able to continue to produce milk in the long term. It needed to be able to get commodity in and out of the factory, and it needed to have a workforce that was able to get in and out of the factory as well, and was also motivated to stay in the area. So quickly you can see that Nestlé has a vested interest, therefore, in a bunch of assets that underpin those functions. And things like, for example, the soils on the farms from which they get their milk. They need those soils to have long-term carrying capacity for those dairy farms, the ability to produce milk into the factory. So that what that starts to do is to provide a business case for Nestlé to invest in environmental assets, essentially into assets in that landscape which help protect long-term soil health and fertility and keep the soils on the land. And it also provides a business case for other assets in the landscape too, from Nestlé's perspective. Important thing there is we're starting to define the landscape and its value from the perspective of the people, the organisation in this case, that we want to entice to pay money into that landscape, essentially. So we're creating a demand or customer focused perspective on landscape and landscape quality. So demand focus, first key aspect of Lens. The second key aspect of Lens that is really important to bring out is we fairly rapidly could spot that Nestlé wasn't the only company in that landscape interested in soils, for example. And so we were able to start to matchmake Nestlé with other businesses who had a shared interest in the same assets, in the same landscape. And indeed, we've built a value chain where Nestlé is co-procuring with United Utilities to pay for soil management interventions in the surrounding landscape. And the reason United Utilities has an interest in those soils is not for security of supply of milk, but it's for phosphorus management. But ultimately, the same interventions, the same assets, provide them with a shared interest. And that's great, because what that means is that Nestlé doesn't feel they're carrying the can for the whole landscape, and nor does United Utilities. So they're much more likely to step forward and do something. Businesses like to work together on things and don't want to think that they're carrying the whole responsibility for a landscape. So it entices them to act and to put their hands further into their pockets, and it increases the size of the pot. It means they can buy more outcome from the landscape. You can get something over the line of viability. It might not be quite viable enough on the basis of phosphorus management for United Utilities to invest in soil health, for example. But if you club that together with Nestlé's interests, it can be worth it, and we can do that in lots of different contexts. So that's broadly how Lens works in practice. It kind of goes through 3 different steps. When we look at a Lens landscape, we tend to do an opportunity analysis. We look at, well, who are the beneficiaries? Where's the money in a landscape, in a region? And of that money, of those businesses and sectors, what elements of those are dependent on landscape functionality, on quality of performance of landscapes? What functions do those businesses require, and what assets underpin those? And then from that we work out where there are overlaps, basically, and that gives us our first step, an opportunity analysis that identifies, well, where might we start to find businesses, to work on businesses who have a shared interest in the same asset, in the same landscape. And when we've done that, we go to the second step, which is to build a value chain, convening businesses around that shared interest, going to groups of land managers or to a group of land managers and saying, well, given these guys are interested in paying for this sort of outcome, what can you guys do for it? And then we ultimately cut a deal based around that. It takes a while. It's not as simple as that, but that's our basic operating unit, is that value chain. And then, having built the first value chain, we start adding additional value chains in that landscape for different functions based on different assets. So we start to build up a more complex land economy. And as we do that, we start to put in governance structures and develop it from there. So that's basically Lens. A really key component of that Tim wanted me to talk about, our relationship with these groups of farmers, or the groups of land managers, not always farmers, because we deal in urban areas as well, and the importance of the fact that we can deal with groups of farmers. We call them supply aggregators, or aggregated supply of functions. And from our perspectives, they can be the farmer clusters or groups that Jess talked about, people like Simon Smart from Black Sheep, who's I think on the call somewhere. They can be people like a milk cooperative. We deal with First Milk, who say, well, since they can aggregate milk, they can aggregate ecosystem services for us. We deal with various other NGO and other types of organisations who can aggregate supply of these outcomes. It's great for us to do that, because it means that we get more joined up outcomes, just as Jess was talking about. It means that those land-based businesses have got more capacity to engage in these novel sorts of markets, which are sometimes complex to work with, and sometimes require quite a lot of technical proficiency, which is outside of the normal operating space of a lot of the businesses concerned. And also, actually, really importantly for us, it helps us build more balanced, equitable trades. We're not dividing and ruling the farmers. We're getting them to be able to negotiate as a group, and as a group you often negotiate a better outcome, and that's really good. It's good for everyone concerned, actually, because it means that we get more stable and more valuable trades, which works for the demand side just as much as the supply side. So really important for us to be dealing with groups of land managers, with aggregated supply, and we do that in all of our landscapes. And from our perspective, and in relation to the Land app and these other tools that are out there, it's really useful for us to have these farmer groups, or these clusters, or to have resources that help them to develop and present their service offerings to our demand side. And so the sorts of things we've just been hearing about are really critical. It helps those groups or clusters of farmers to put together something which really delivers, and then it helps them to communicate that across and set out their stall, essentially, and also then enter into negotiations with our demand side to get the product absolutely right. And exactly as Tim alluded to, it's really useful if they can communicate communicate their offering in a way which resonates with the demand side, it's important that we start to get a bit of a shared lexicon of landscape assets that are important and the landscape functions they provide. And I suppose from our perspective, coming from a very demand oriented side of this piece of this equation, we're really keen that people on the supply side, people who are delivering outcomes from landscapes, can frame those outcomes and frame those functions in a way which resonates with demand, which actually is recognizable to demand. So we need to start talking about, we need to frame those outcomes in terms of things like phosphorus management or flood risk management, things that sound like risk or sound operationally important to the sorts of businesses we can pull together to pay for those outcomes. And so I think a lot of the time we sort of think that a lot of the work that needs to be done here is almost like some kind of Babelfish translator, which can talk on the one hand to business and commercial interests in their language, and then talk on the other side of that from the perspective of the sorts of people who operate the land. I think that's really critical. But yeah, common lexicon, but one that doesn't forget the importance of mobilizing the customer in the first instance. Okay, I think that's probably me talked over time.
Brilliant, Tom. I was going to ask you, if it comes to the groups of farmers, the facilitation funds or farmer clusters, if they want to kind of start to supply ecosystem services, I mean, would they call on you to start to appraise the demand within the environment, and then this joined up thinking starts to happen? How would they create a marketplace locally, do you think?
Yeah, it's really good question. On the whole, we've tended to start with the demand side, actually. We've tended to be brought on by people on the demand side, but there's no reason at all why one shouldn't do it from the other perspective. I think if you've got a group of land managers who are collaborating to deliver functions or outcomes from a landscape, for them to start to go through a process of systematically thinking, well, who's out there in our landscape in terms of businesses who might have an interest in what we can deliver? I think doing a customer analysis like that would be really valuable. And obviously that's the sort of thing we can help with, but it's also, I just say that, people should start to systematically do it themselves. And I think that's about thinking through, we kind of think through functions, assets, beneficiaries, a FAB analysis. We're really keen to think, well, who are the beneficiaries? You can break down your regional GVA, gross value added in terms of the economy. Where's the money around you, basically? And then think about the sectors involved in that, including but beyond agri-food. And think about, well, where are their dependencies? What are the functions they need from a landscape, and what assets that underpin those? And then just to start to think, well, where is there an asset that delivers value for more than one sector or business, and start to get that insight, and then start to find ways of getting to those businesses and talking about their need and talking about what you can do for it. But yeah, so we've tended to start with demand, but we've also in other places started with people who've got an interest in landscape or in managing landscape, and then we can start to help them do a demand-oriented analysis.
Brilliant. And Tom, if we're going to continue to run sort of some form of webinar series, would you be happy to present with a bit more context around how these groups start to seek out the demand and sort of share best practice and ideas and support frameworks?
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah,
okay.
Happy to do that. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah. I mean, we could sort of start to put a bit of a, I don't know, a toolkit together or something like that with whoever was interested,
Yeah, brilliant. Jane, I've just seen you've messaged. What we'll do is we'll cover that at the end, if that's okay. Yeah, I'm sure any conversations can also go offline, but we'll touch on that at the end, if we may. Brilliant. Well, Tom, thank you very much for that. That's incredibly interesting, and of course, a fundamental component of the future of the private sector funding itself. So yeah, thank you for all your hard work, and looking forward to learning more as we go forward. Brilliant. So I'm just going to jump on now. The next sort of 10 minutes or so, I thought I'd just quickly share the Land app and try and explain a little bit about how people like Dan are using it. And just to reiterate sort of why we're doing this, so you can see. Now, I know a lot of you are already using the Land app, so apologies, you'll know all this already, but for those that haven't, I just want to quickly run through the software. So welcome to the Land app. This is, as I say, this is born out of my own frustration. It's been a 4-year journey to get it to where we are now, and everything is going incredibly well, which I'm very glad to say. As just to reiterate, that the real purpose behind the software is to enable the output of high value triple bottom line products or outputs being produced on farms. That's really all that we care about, is that a farm is secure, it's stable, it's financially resilient, and it's delivering great environmental benefits and public benefits. So that's really the purpose behind this. I'm not from a technology background, but I saw that technology is a fundamental component to help move land managers towards best practice by being better connected to the wider ecosystem. So anyway, with all that being said, this is the Land app. Welcome. So if anyone hasn't yet created an account, you're more than welcome to do so by coming onto our website, thelandapp.com, register for free. I say the software is entirely free to use. So once you create an account, you have it to play on to your heart's content. And we only charge for printing, which I'll also touch on later. So when you arrive in the software, you won't have this many maps, but essentially each of these individual cards are individual maps or individual holdings. You can have maps for larger landscapes as well, but essentially each of these are their own individual map. So what I'm going to do, for the sake of this very quick demonstration, is create a new map. I'm going to call this a home farm, create an empty map. And just quickly show you how you set up a new map, and I'm going to show you a larger map shortly. Again, some of you will see. So once you've created, set up a new map, this is what you see. So as context, you have Ordnance Survey as a backcloth. You have this boundary section up in the top left, which is where all the authoritative data, the RPA and land registry data sits. The project section, which is where any projects and schemes you design are held. And we have a series of project templates to enable you to design up the projects in a really streamlined way. And as Dan was saying, make sure that the data is kept clean and well organized for further analysis. So we'll come to that in a second. We also have a series of drawing tools. The software allows you to import and export any data pretty much, so or GeoJSON, KML or shapefiles. The software is collaborative, so you can add any other collaborator to your map and they'll get notified to come and join you on the software, which is great for sharing the maps that you'll be creating for your boundaries back with your farmers in your group. As I say, we charge for printing, so we have to pay an OS royalty fee, unfortunately. So you can very, very easily print out maps. We've got a series of help guides here in the top right, so you can search for pretty much anything you need. If you need anything more, just give us a shout and we'll put something together. And in the bottom right-hand corner, you can always start a new conversation with us. So we really pride ourselves on our support and helping people get as much value as possible from the software. That's the framework. I'm going to show you how to set up a map. So we've also built a Chrome extension. So this Chrome web store, you can search here and you can search for the Land app and you can add our Chrome extension to Chrome. And what that allows you to do is when you come into the RPA account, hopefully I don't have to log in again. Yes, I do. Do that. Once you're in the RPA account, so if you've got access to your farmers' accounts, or indeed they can do it themselves, jump into the business overview page. The Chrome extension becomes highlighted green. You can choose collect land cover with hedges, and that data gets downloaded out in the bottom left. And back in the Land app, all you need to do is drag that file into the map window, click on boundary, and you'll see that's popped up on the boundary section. And here we go. Here's the field boundaries for this SBI number. What we're looking to do as the next step inside the Land app is produce an estate report, which will then automatically proactively notify you of all the grant opportunities available for this area, whether it's water, grants for water or trees, or all the different support and advice services. And actually, I'm also considering putting something in where if you have a facilitation fund boundary and a farmer creates an account and their farm boundary sits within your boundary, to also proactively notify them that they're welcome to join your group. It's going to help these groups hopefully grow and help new groups form as well. So that's importing the data. This information comes from the RPA containing the land use codes as well, so permanent grassland, etc., etc. And all you need to do is click, once that data has been imported, click Create Project, Basic Payment Scheme, And all this information is copied down into the project section, which means you can edit it. And as you can see, it colors the features accordingly. So here we've got woodland is in dark green, hedges are in dark green as lines, and tracks and paths, etc. They're all dark grey. So once you have this information in, as you can see, that took 10 seconds, you can click on a feature and click on the change land use, and you can start to change the how the land is being used. So again, it just allows you to really quickly and easily start to mock up projects and the land use, which allows you to obviously start doing appraisal across the landscape. So you can also do things like cut features. You can do put buffers in. You can put buffers around the whole internal boundary, or you can do it partly way around the farm, so field. So I'm just going to take that buffer. So I subtracted it from the cropped area, so we're not double counting, and put this into fallow. And as I say, all of this is entirely free to do on the software. So if you've imported the data, shared the map back with your farmer, started working on this, again, it keeps everyone on the same page. And when we can proactively notify that there are grant opportunities available, then you'll be able to design on those projects and schemes as well. I'm just gonna, so imagine that's completed. You can go into table view, and you can see a full table view breakdown of how the land's being used. And this can be exported into Excel. I'm also just quickly going to show you, you can left click on the 3 vertical dots, duplicate. I'm going to put this onto countryside stewardship, CSS, and it copies all that BPS information onto countryside stewardship. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take my 2 woodland blocks, change this to woodland for woodland improvement. And what you can see happens when I use countryside stewardship template rather than BPS, not only do I have all the countryside stewardship options, and next week you'll see the ELS options as well as the UK habitat classification, but you also see the countryside stewardship code, the indicative payment rate per hectare, as well as a link here through into the gov.uk website where you can see all of the information about that option. So just allows you to keep understanding of what any of these options actually entail. And then so you also, so I can show you here, I know this because it's our farm at home, but using the map layers data, we can also turn on different map overlays. And again, you have these by default. So flood zones, triple SIs, etc. So I know that this is a water meadows, things like scheduled ancient monuments, public rights of way. So you can get full context of the holding, AOMB, MVZs, which we don't have, we're not in that. As well as things like provisional agricultural land classification. So you get really good context of the holding, and you can also interact with any ordnance survey feature as well. So I can turn on OS General Surface and you can interact with all of these features, copy them to projects. So you get full context of the holding with all these different data layers. But as I was getting to earlier, I know that this is in a water meadow, so I'm going to put this into a water meadow option. So there we go. And now we can come into the 3 vertical dots in table view, and because these have values, we can start to look at how much we're going to get paid for the delivery of these options. And you can scenario plan, 3 vertical dots, click duplicate, create a copy, and create a second scenario. So really quick and simple. The software is also used for doing diversification plans, for looking at unregistered land, so we have all the land registry data as well, for doing RLE1s. So a whole myriad of different tasks it can be used for. You can also upload georeference photos. So if I'm going to create, rename this as photo. Oh, I won't worry about renaming that. I'm going to upload a photo. So again, it just allows you to keep everything on the same page and allows you to work better with your farmers. And with Elms and Natural Capital, this digital data, this organized, structured, analyzable digital data where you can actually go and implement the scheme design. You can monitor the performance, and all of that information get fed back to the funders. It's going to be critical for creating this natural capital market, as well as what will be Elms, because Elms cannot be paper submissions as countryside stewardship are. It has to be digital. It has to be built off OS data. So As Dan said, the Land App is being used for a series of different in the ELMS trials and tests. So that's just quick context as to how the software works. On another level, many of you will have now seen this map. The Land App, because it is collaborative, it does mean that we can start to create these maps and share them with a wide range of stakeholders. And what we're doing here is we're creating an aggregated view of all of the facilitation, the farming cluster groups, so that we can start with Tom to create this natural capital marketplace and make sure that funding is available to flow back down to the farmers for the delivery of ecosystem services. So these are the groups that we have so far. So everyone has uploaded their own boundaries. If any more of you would like to be part of this, then please do let me know. I'll make you an editor and you can upload the boundaries. And I say this is a real common endeavor. This is really the starting conversation, or the first step into this opening up of a marketplace. So it's only going to really work if we're all doing it together. We all know each other and we're all moving in the same direction. And as we have the United Nations Climate Change Conference next November, what I'm really focused on, and the mission really that I'm undertaking at the moment, is how do we turn the UK into a case study and an exemplar for the rest of the world as to how land can and should be managed? Because it's only by coming together and delivering these sort of operations at scale that we can really create a model that we can then export to the rest of the world and really clean up the natural environment everywhere. So that's my absolute mission and the real purpose behind having built the Land App. So these are the groups that we have so far, and Tom's boundaries, the landscape enterprise network boundaries, where there is aggregated demand and there is a pot of cash, these are where the groups are. And obviously with Tom, what we're looking to do is make sure that these boundaries for funding are throughout the whole of the UK. So wherever you sit, there's always a pot of cash that you as a facilitator group can tap into. So anyway, that's a little bit from me. I'm happy to run fuller webinars, full end-to-end, where we do take Q&A as we go. But just as a quick introduction, that's basically how you can use the Land App. Brilliant. So I will keep that open. I'm just going to jump back into the chat. If anyone has any more questions, please do put that onto the chat. I'm going to just have a think. If anyone has any questions that they'd like to unmute themselves for and ask into the wider group, okay, I'll go through step by step, actually. I'll go through each of these questions. So Jane asks, how do the offerings that Tom is talking about relate to public goods? It sounds as though some of them overlap, but many of them are things we have that have a monetary value. Will one push out the other? Tom, would you like to answer that? And I think that's really asking, so if there's public goods being delivered, maybe funded by DEFRA, where does that match with private sector goods? How will we make sure we're not double paying for environmental features?
Yeah, it's a really helpful question. Thanks very much. Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, we see the public as another demand interest in these landscapes, and so it could be that a public good is something for which there is no private market, in which case that's a useful thing for government to be buying because it starts to fill in the gaps. It could be that something's entirely a private good and the government isn't interested and therefore it wouldn't engage in that. I mean, I think it's also interesting when you consider that within our private markets, we're aggregating demand from private to private demand. It could be that there's public-private demand as well, and that the one could be that the public could be co-investing with private sector in certain types of outcomes. And so absolutely, there's potential for overlap. Absolutely, ultimately, it's all about functions from the landscape, and there are different sorts of demand for that. It needs to be put through a proper regional governance to make sure that those sorts of things balance up. Sometimes they could conflict. I think it's good to have multiple interests in a landscape, sometimes trading off against each other, actually. So I don't know if that helps, but we see public goods as being another function and another demand interest to be woven into a landscape alongside the private sector ones.
Brilliant, Tom. Well, I've actually been spending a bit of time with a chap called Sam Sinclair from Biodiversify, who is all about systematic conservation planning, which essentially is where you get multi-stakeholder design of a landscape. So everyone's involved right from the get-go. And I think I will feed Sam into this conversation as we move forward and ask him to do a presentation to you all explaining how this process works, because then you make sure that essentially you have one design that's getting delivered over a period of time, and each of the funders then make sure they're contributing to that. So that's a very interesting component to add in. So
totally. And just to very quickly add on to that, we're part of an ELMS test and trial, as lots and lots of people are, up in Cumbria, where we're specifically looking at how ELMS and LENS kind of work together, basically.
Brilliant.
Because I think it's important.
Very, very much so. Brilliant. Thanks, Tom. And thank you, Jane, for the question. Dr. Anderson Walker, can I add 2 facilitation funds groups to the land app? Yes, you can. Jess has uploaded, God, I'm not sure how many, but you can certainly upload multiple. So yeah, if you need a hand, just email me directly. I'm more than happy to show you how. Not a problem. Michelle, hello, Michelle. Question for Dan. Have to leave at 3. Okay. Could you explain a bit more about the way you've captured habitat boundaries on the GIS, and something about any issues with capturing data in the field if you are asking farmers, volunteers to do this? Dan, have you got any points on that?
Yeah, of course. So I see capturing the GIS data as a 2-part process. First is that desktop study. So like Tim just showed you, is getting all the hedge data down from HM registry to see what they have already. And then what we're doing within our ELM trial as well is taking those desktop maps out into the field. So we are testing an application of Collector. So it's taking the phone out into the field and ground truthing what we see. So that's adding ditches, or hopefully we get the farmer to add the ditches before we go. So yeah, it's basically, we found the easiest to do is actually being in the field and looking what's there. Issues, the first issue we've come across is a lot of the hedges that the HM registry have down aren't actually hedges, they're dry stone walls with bramble over the top. So these are things that you won't actually be able to see unless you're in the field or you get the farmer to look in the field. So it's very important to try and ground truth this. And then with volunteers, just making sure they're aware of different types of boundary. UK Hub define it really well. However, there's a bit of room for error. I mean, we still need to tighten it up a little bit. But yeah, it's definitely about walking the fields and making sure that what you have down is correct, and just having a constant dynamic process when you're updating that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dan. And actually, I've been both Dan and I have been speaking to Kitty Rose Ordnance Survey. So we are looking to see whether Ordnance Survey can also feed into the UK habitat classification, because obviously OS have already captured loads of data. So it's just whether there's an easy way of getting a wider spread of data from the get-go. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Michelle. Dan, any more points? Sorry.
No, I don't think so, but I think Jenny might want to quickly just say, I know you're really looking at signposting people, and it would be really great if Land App did have that automatic, but I think just to not boggle people with too much information, it's just about finding those key organisations, whether it's WCT, FLAG, places like that, who know the area, and they can help signpost more to the wider CABA groups, etc. And but yeah, that's all from me. Thank you, Tim.
Totally. Okay, thank you, Dan. Yeah, absolutely. We can certainly have some form of working group that helps define who those stakeholders are that will get connected to landowners. Yeah.
Tim, it's Jenny here. I just wondered that there are structures that we are sort of proposing to how it all might fit together to link in with local plans and local enterprise partnerships, industrial strategies, and all the rest. So that we can share quite easily how that looks from our perspective as Gloucestershire as a case study. So sort of working up from water bodies and parishes up to the catchment partnerships and the protected landscapes, linking into the local nature partnerships. And then obviously the local nature partnerships and the local enterprise partnerships being the sort of like the data sort of centre for decisions made around local plans and planning and mitigations. So there's a structure that we can see how it would all work, and creating this data baseline is essential in that. So we've got some ideas which I'm sure other people have too, and very happy to share what our thinking.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, Jen, that would be great to open up another time. I think, yeah, if we do another webinar session, you know, if you were to be able to share how that wider stakeholder group could get engaged and how we can pull everyone onto the same page, that would be brilliant. And obviously, I'd be very keen to have a chat with you about what we can do in the Land App to support that process. Thank you, Jenny. From Tracy, is it possible to upload map info and ArcView files to the Land app? Yes, you can export from as a shape file and you can upload that directly into the Land app really easily. Again, give me a shout if you need a hand. Becky, how's this work funded? I can imagine it takes a few days per farm. It's not something that many farmers I work with see justification for. Jen, you might be a good person to answer that actually. Jenny Phelps, that is. How people commit their time into these sort of projects.
Yeah, sorry, I just went to get a glass of water. Yeah, we definitely, I mean, I think the way that we're looking at it, I think as Dan alluded to, is the fact that if you think that the natural capital as assessment will replace basic payments, and that the revenue that's going to be raised from that basic payment, then I'm sure farmers would invest in actually getting that natural capital baseline. And there's a lot more that we think that we might be able to accrue from that natural capital baseline and link UK Hab to things like carbon auditing and all the other mechanisms. So I think that if it's an annual assessment, it's taking us about 6 advisors about 4 hours to do 1,000 acres at the moment. So, you know, it's not much more than the cost of a FEP with the tools that we've got at the moment. So but at the moment we're funded to do it, but I think farmers would invest in it if they felt that those payment mechanisms flow from that.
Absolutely, and second, so onto that point as well. I mean, I think from my perspective, what I'm endeavouring to do is to make the process as simple and easy as possible for everyone, and so to really cut out the amount of hours that it's going to take, so that it just reduces the cost, reduces the risk, and just opens this up. And that's really why we've made the Land app free and why we've filled it with so much data. So. Cool, guys, I'm just getting kicked out of the room that I had booked. But I think that's the last question. So unless anyone has anything more, please do follow up on email. We'll try and open this up as a conversation. I'll think about how best to facilitate this, because this, as I say, is very much the starting of the conversation, and it'd be great to all stay on the same page. So I think we'll leave it there for now. But as I say, if anyone has any questions, please do feel free to follow up. And yeah, I look forward to seeing where this goes. Thank you very much, everyone, for all of your time. Thank you for the speakers, and yeah, look forward to following up very soon.
Thanks, Tim.
Take care, everyone.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.